Hello, BISC1323. This is the beginning of recorded lecture 3.3, and we're still in the invertebrates chapter. We left off last time kind of in the middle of talking about cnidarians. We had talked about some of their body features, but there are a couple more things to mention. One of them is that cnidarians have two possible body plans. So we saw this figure last time to talk about their gastrovascular cavity and their mesoglia and their two cell layers, but now I want to call your attention to the fact that there are these two different forms that cnidarians can have called medusa or polyp. Really, it's the same body, just sort of flipped upside down. The medusa form is what you see in your classic sea jelly or jellyfish, and it can move around. It's not anchored to a surface. Whereas the polyp form is what we see in sea anemones, classically, which is anchored to a surface and is sessile. So the polyp is sessile, the medusa is motile. Interestingly, some cnidarians are what we call dimorphic. That means both. Not at the same time, of course, but they alternate between the two forms as part of their life cycle. Here's an example of a sea jelly doing this. Here it is in its polyp form. It releases part of itself that becomes a medusa. Here it is in the medusa form, and then it releases larvae that live as polyp form. So yeah, dimorphic is what we refer to cnidarians that alternate between both, but most of them are either one or the other. Another thing to note about cnidarians is that most of them are predators. Here's one grabbing a fish. In order to do their predator thing, they have a specialized type of cell called a cnidocyte. And within that cell, there is a specialized organelle called a nematocyst. There's a touch-sensitive mechanism here that can release these. And again, this is a cell, so this is microscopic. This is very small. Release this barb that delivers paralyzing toxins. So that's how they're able to grab the prey. So these predatory cnidarians use specialized cells. Again, the cells are called cnidocytes. The organelles are called nematocysts. Don't get those mixed up, to deliver paralyzing toxins. Okay, now this is phylum Cnidaria. In the 8 taxa we talked about on the first day of class, after phylum comes class. So let's talk about some classes within phylum Cnidaria, starting with class Anthozoa. Anthozoa includes sea anemones and corals of many different types. So Anthozoa means sea anemones and corals. They only have polyp bodies. There are no medusa corals or medusa sea anemones. Some of these have important symbiotic relationships with dinoflagellate algae. Hey, callback. Remember this slide when we were talking about protists and dinoflagellates? The dinoflagellates are the photosynthetic half to this team, and the coral is the animal half of this. So yeah, some of these anthozoans are part of this coral reef ecosystem, which it's vital in the formation of these coral reefs, the actual coral itself. Another class of cnidarians is class Scyphozoa. This is our classic sea jellies or jellyfish. So Scyphozoans, sea jellies or jellyfish, and we kind of already talked about these. These have medusa bodies, or some of them are dimorphic. Moving on, again, in this chapter, when I get to the class level, I'm usually pretty brief with things. So it's more just knowing the name and knowing what's in it, and maybe, a few features associated with it. So up next is class Cubozoa. And at first glance, this looks like a jellyfish. This looks like Scyphozoa, but this is technically a different class that just has a similar body. The biggest difference here, you've got this bell and you've got these tentacles, but in Cubozoa, the tentacles are located on 4, you can see 2 of them up front, there would be 2 of them in the back, 4 pedicles, attachment points. So, this doesn't really look like a cube to me, but I guess if you think about 4 points of attachment, that kind of looks like a square. I could see why someone would call it Cubozoa. These are, yeah, box or cube-shaped medusa. This is why these things are referred to as box jellyfish, as opposed to real jellyfish or Scyphozoa jellyfish. On the whole, they tend to be smaller than most sea jellies, but they're a lot more dangerous. So yeah, these can be life-threatening. They're nematocysts and paralyzing toxins, even to humans. So yeah, smaller but more dangerous. Also, curiously, some of these cubozoan box jellyfish have eyes. Now, these are not highly developed eyes, nowhere near as complicated as our eyes, but they are simple light sensing organs. Or simple light sensing structures. Remember, they don't have real organs. They don't have a brain to process this information. So it's very curious that they're able to sense light, but not really process in a deep way what that light means. Up next, we've got class Hydrozoa, which includes hydras. Not this hydra, this hydra, although I guess I can kind of see the resemblance. These are, of course, not heads poking out of this. These are tentacles, and this is our classic polyp body shape. So Hydrozoa includes hydras. Now, this is the classic body of a polyp hydra, but there's a lot of diversity in what hydras can look like. Some of them are solitary polyps like this, but some of them form these big colonies of different polyps growing on top of one another to form these much larger structures. Additionally, some members of Hydrozoa are medusa. This looks just like a jellyfish. In fact, it's, informally referred to as a peach blossom jellyfish. The fact that this closely resembles the Scyphozoa jellyfish is, of course, convergent evolution. We know genetically, from phylogenetic computational sequence alignment analysis, that this is a hydrozoan jellyfish, not a scyphozoan jellyfish. But yeah, it's a solitary medusa. And another really weird hydrozoan is this Portuguese man-o'-war, which again kind of looks like a jellyfish, but it's actually a colony of polyps that, don't sweat the details here, but there are a lot of fun details. A colony of individuals that come together and take on different roles to capture prey or do reproduction or float on the surface of the ocean. And so a lot of different bodies that these hydras can have. I'm just going to say solitary polyp, solitary medusa, or large colonies, and that covers the hydrozoa. All right, back to our main phylogenetic tree for animals. So we've covered sponges, we've covered cnidarians. Up next, we have a sort of umbrella category. So this is called Bilateria. You can notice this is a clade, it's an ancestor and all of its descendants, and this is going to encompass everything from here on out. Bilateria is exactly what it sounds like. It refers to bilateral symmetry. So all further groups have bilateral symmetry, and all further groups are triploblastic. So again, this may seem like a lot in this table, but it fills out real easy. Everything is a triploblast except the two exceptions, sponges and cnidarians. Everything has bilateral symmetry except for the two exceptions, sponges and cnidarians. So this is maybe not as much information as it first seemed. So we're in Bilateria. Obviously, this includes a lot of stuff. Look at this, protostomia and deuterostomia. I said that these were going to be clades, that these are going to be evolutionarily significant. So we've got a lot of protostomes coming up. We've got a couple of deuterostomes coming up. Let's start with protostomia. So this does not include all further groups, but it's going to include quite a few groups. We'll be in here for a while. We're in clade protostomia now. Members are protostomes. And yeah, that was another one of the things on this table, embryonic development. Again, we're not filling everything out, but it is almost everything. If you can remember the two deuterostomes, which again, we'll talk about at the end of this chapter, it'll be easy to remember which ones are not deuterostomes. Then you know which ones are protostomes. Okay, so within protostomia, there are two more branch points. There's a group called Ecdysozoa, and there's a group called Lophotrochozoa. Let's go after the Lophotrochozoa first. That is a group that includes these 5 things. So what does it mean? Yeah, to orient ourselves, we're in clade protostomia, and this is a taxon called a superphylum. So there are going to be several phyla within this phyla: Platyhelminthes, Rotifera, Nemurtia, the rest. So this Lophotrochozoa is a superphylum taxon. Okay, what does it mean to be a Lophotrochozoan? Well, members of superphylum Lophotrochozoa have either a lophophore or a trochophore, hence the Lophotrochozoa. So what the heck is a lophophore? What the heck is a trochophore? The lophophore refers to this ciliated feeding apparatus. It's not obvious in all of these Lophotrochozoans, but we definitely see it in many of them. The trochophore refers to a specific type of larva that has 2 bands of cilia running around the center. And again, this is not obvious in all of these Lophotrochozoans, but it's, you see it in their larva. And I'm only pointing out these anatomical details because that's where the group gets its name. So members of Lophotrochozoa have either a lophophore, a ciliated tentacle feeding apparatus, that's a mouthful, or a trochophore larva, a larva having 2 bands of cilia around the middle. Okay, now that we're in superphylum Lophotrochozoa, let's look at some phyla within this, starting with Platyhelminthes. Platyhelminthes are flatworms. Now, we're going to see a lot of different worms as we go through invertebrates. These are not your classic earthworms. These are not your night crawlers. These are flatworms. Some of these live in fresh water. A lot of these bright, colorful ones exist in marine ecosystems. These flatworms are acoelomates. In fact, I think it was, flatworm. They're the poster child for what it means to be an acoelomate. 3 cell layers, but no extra body cavity. So that helps us fill this out. So acoelomates as far as body cavity goes. We'll talk about circulatory system in just a second. So these are more complex than cnidarians. Remember, we're sort of building up levels of complexity. Cnidarians did not have complex organs or organ systems, but these flatworms do. So we can look at this sort of cross-section of different systems here and focus on what they have. Let's look at a nervous system first. So this is an upgrade. You've got a nervous system running the entire length of the body and this simple primitive brain for processing this information. That's important. So there's a brain and nervous system, and some of them have go back to this weird, they kind of look like googly eyes. They kind of look cross-eyed to me, at least. But yeah, some eyes present in some species as well. Another important organ system is the reproductive systems. It should say systems because, look at this, ovary, testes, male and female in the same individual. So there are reproductive systems. Most of these flatworms are hermaphrodites. We also see a digestive system where there's a mouth and a gastrovascular cavity that runs the length of the worm. Now, what we don't see is a circulatory system. So the job of a circulatory system is to circulate nutrients and gases throughout the body. And that's necessary for something like us, like a human, because we're absorbing our nutrients in the digestive tract, and then all the rest of the body needs to get those nutrients. But in these worms, the digestive tract is not located just, in the abdomen, like in one part of the worm. It's throughout the entire body. So you don't need a special separate circulatory system because your gastrovascular cavity as a flatworm kind of fulfills that function. So digestive system runs length of body, and I'm using this phrase, it fulfills the role of a circulatory system too. As far as the table goes, I'm going to say NA for circulatory system. They do not have a dedicated special circulatory system, but the job is still getting done. It's getting done by the digestive system. And there's one more system to point out here, the excretory system. So you'll notice in their digestive system, there is a mouth, but there's no anus. So food comes in the mouth, and instead of going out at an anus, it goes out through pores that run the entire length of the body. This excretory system is powered by, moving on to a, sorry for all the details here. Oh, we got the googly eyes, eye spots, but I wanted to emphasize these flame cells, which are located near these pores. I guess someone thought that this looked like a torch, the cilia here, that's why they're called flame cells. Anyway, they power the excretory system, sending wastes out through these excretory pores. So there's an excretory system here powered by these so-called flame cells. There's another system that's missing, and that's a respiratory system, gills or lungs or something like that. We will see those in other animals, but not in these flatworms. They're small and flat enough to where they could just exchange gases through their skin via diffusion, so they don't need a specialized respiratory system. Okay, so what could we say about these flatworms other than their organ systems? Well, a lot of these are free living, but a lot of these are parasitic. So many of these are just crawling around at the bottom of a pond or in the ocean, scavenging pieces of food that fall. But there are some pretty important parasites that are part of platyhelminthes, including some parasites that infect us. Humans are not affected by gill flukes, that's a fish thing, but liver flukes affect humans negatively. Tapeworms affect humans negatively. And they've got some interesting life cycles. Don't sweat the details on these, but I mean, I think it is interesting to point out we've seen pathogens in bacteria, we've seen pathogens in protists. There are definitely other animals that are pathogens as well. And we absolutely cannot treat these with antibiotics. Antibiotics are effective against bacteria. You're going to need specialized drugs that hit something these eukaryotes are doing without affecting us to deal with tapeworms or liver flukes. So I think that's all I wanted to say about platyhelminthes or flatworms. Moving on, next one we've got up is phylum Rotifera, or here's what your typical rotifer looks like. This is microscopic. You would not be able to see these with the naked eye. These are multicellular, but they are very small. And just to remind you, we're in clade protostomia, superphylum Lophotrochozoa, and now phylum Rotifera. So these rotifers are microscopic, they live in the water, and they are pseudocoelomates. This is the first time we've seen something that's a pseudocoelomate. If you'll remember, that means they have a body cavity that is located in between the mesoderm and the endoderm. So what are they doing with this pseudocoelom? What are they doing with this cavity? Well, they're using it to house a hydrostatic skeleton. We can see this labeled here. Pseudocoel, this sort of blue structure here. There is pressurized fluid inside of this body cavity that fulfills the function of a skeleton. So the key terms describe a hydrostatic skeleton as a skeleton that consists of aqueous fluid held under pressure in a closed body compartment. So instead of a bone skeleton or a chitin exoskeleton, their skeleton is made from this pressurized fluid. This allows us to fill this out. They're pseudocoelomates, and there's not going to be a circulatory system here either. We'll get to these soon enough, but it's another NA for circulatory system. So what's interesting, I think, about these rotifers is how they feed. So they have this structure located near the mouth called a corona that sort of spins around, flaps around, that sucks water into the mouth, water and particles of food. The food particles are then ground up by this structure called a mastax. So I want to go to some nifty microscope images of mastax. Yeah, these are some gnarly looking jaw-like structures for crunching up food particles here. But yeah, the corona and the mastax are definitely unique structures to rotifers. And yeah, they're filter feeders, so they're using these structures to get their food filtering out of the water. Corona is defined as a wheel-like structure on the anterior portion of the rotifer that contains cilia and moves food and water toward the mouth. Mastax, reading from the key terms, a jawed pharynx unique to the rotifers. So, yep, that's rotifers. And actually, that's all I wanted to say about phylum Rotifera. That was a quick one. Moving on, let's go to Nemertea. So again, we're still in clade protostomia, superphylum Lophotrochozoa. Nemerteans are ribbon worms. Another worm. Some of these are terrestrial. These are not your common earthworms. These are not your normal, night crawlers. Some of them are terrestrial on the land. Some of them are aquatic. Most of them are aquatic, actually. These ribbon worms, also known as proboscis worms, can be predators or they can be scavengers. So these are, again, not your common earthworm. They do something that no other worm does. They have this unique structure called a proboscis, hence the term proboscis worms, that they can eject or evert from their bodies. So this is this sticky structure that is housed inside of their body that can be sort of turned inside out as a defense mechanism or a predatory mechanism to grab stuff. There are cool videos and stuff like this online, but this is a cool enough image by itself showing this the eversion of this proboscis. If we want to see what it looks like on the inside, here's the mouth, the stomach, the anus, and within the body, here's this specialized cavity called the rhynchocoele, housing this labeled red here, proboscis, that can be, again, everted, like it turned inside out. It's not fully ejected like a net going out. It still stays attached to the worm, and then it can be brought back inside of the worm's body to bring any food or whatever else it captured with it. So the members of phylum Nemertea have a proboscis housed in this rhynchocoele cavity that can be ejected or turned inside out. It's used to capture prey. Another interesting thing about these Nemerteans, they are coelomates. And their coelom houses a closed circulatory system. Okay, so yep, we've got our first of many coelomates or eucoelomates here, and this body cavity within the mesoderm is our first circulatory system that we've come to. Now, closed circulatory system implies the existence of open circulatory system. And yep, as we start talking about circulatory systems, we're going to see that there are two types. I think I want to just introduce and define both of these right now. Again, right now we're talking about something with a closed circulatory system, but let's define both of them and then we can just refer back to this when we do hit something with an open circulatory system. So a closed circulatory system has blood that is contained or closed off from the rest of the body within blood vessels, arteries, and veins. And you've got a heart, or sometimes multiple hearts, that circulate this blood. It's called closed because the blood is within these vessels. In a closed circulatory system, blood is contained within a heart or hearts and blood vessels and is pumped throughout the body. In contrast, an open circulatory system has the organs, the internal organs, just sort of floating around in this fluid called hemolymph. These open circulatory system animals do not have blood. Instead, they have this fluid called hemolymph. And they've got a heart, or sometimes multiple hearts, that will circulate this hemolymph around. But again, it's not kept closed within hemolymph vessels. It's just sort of floating in a body cavity with the organs surrounded by it. So in an open circulatory system, organs are surrounded by hemolymph in a cavity called the hemocoel, a heart or hearts circulated around. So there's still circulation either way, but it's a matter of whether the fluid is just surrounding the organs or kept closed off within vessels. So again, we'll come back to this in other groups. And as I pointed out, in Nemertians, in these ribbon worms, there's a closed circulatory system. So here we go. Nemertea, coelomates, closed circulatory system. All right, moving on from Nemertians to mollusks. This is a big one. So we're still in Protostomia, we're still in Lophotrochozoa, we're in phylum Mollusca now. Phylum Mollusca includes, deep breath, clams, oysters, mussels, scallops, snails, slugs, chitons, tusk shells, cuttlefish, squid, octopi, nautiluses. There's a lot of stuff here. So it might be difficult to try to nail these things down, to try to identify some feature that they all have in common, because yeah, compare a slug to a nautilus, or a mussel or scallop or oyster to an octopus. These are wildly different bodies, but despite looking very different and being a very diverse group, there are a couple of things that they do have in common with one another. So mollusks are mostly marine, but you've got some freshwater snails and slugs, and you do have some terrestrial snails and slugs as well. But yeah, most of them are in salt water. And the two body features are a foot and a mantle. So all mollusks have a structure called a foot. This is a muscular structure that's typically used for crawling around, for locomotion, and or for anchoring to a surface. Our typical mollusk is obviously a snail here, but we're going to see all the groups of mollusca have a foot labeled here. Again, that's what they're using to crawl around on. The other body feature that all mollusks have is something called a mantle. A mantle is defined in the key terms. We can see it labeled here. This green structure over the back. The mantle is, reading from the key terms, a specialized part of the skin that encloses all visceral organs and secretes shells. So the mantle is not the same thing as the shell, but the mantle is skin that secretes the components of a shell. Obviously, not all mollusks have a shell, if you think about a slug, for example, but in mollusks that do have a shell, the mantle secretes that. In these shellless mollusks, there's still a mantle there no matter what, whether there's a shell or not. So the mantle may or may not secrete a calcium carbonate shell. This also creates what's called a mantle cavity, which has gills or lungs, as the case may be. And so, yeah, this is the mantle cavity. Sorry, it's not labeled on this one, but yeah, this would be the mantle cavity created by the mantle, and there's some gill in this particular snail. Now, there's another body feature that they don't all have. Again, they all have a mantle, they all have a foot in one form or another. Most of them have this structure called a radula. The radula, you see labeled here, is something associated with the mouth. So the radula is used for feeding. And oh boy, this looks like some sort of wicked buzzsaw kind of structure. And if we look at some microscope images, oh, that's the stuff of nightmares here. Well, if you're getting scared looking at these horrible teeth, they're scraping algae off of rocks. So that's what the radula is used. It's used for feeding, usually scraping things off of rocks. And yeah, most have a radula for feeding. These are coelomates. And we usually talk about these body cavities as far as like, oh, what does it do? What does it do? They're coelomates. They have this body cavity, but it doesn't do much for them. I'm using the phrase reduced coelom function. Yeah, it's labeled here, and it houses some of the internal organs, but it's not doing some discrete or really important function. But it is important to note that they are coelomates. It's also important to note what their circulatory system is like, so we can fill out this table. Most have an open circulatory system. There will be one exception, and we will point that out when we get to it, but most of them have hemolymph that is circulated throughout the internal cavity. And yeah, you can see this here. All of this would be this internal cavity, this visceral mass with hemolymph inside. So that allows us to fill out our table. Mollusks are coelomates, and either or for circulatory system. Most are open. There's going to be one important exception that is closed. So I'm writing either or here. All right. Because this is such a big phylum, we definitely have to talk about classes when it comes to mollusks, but I'm not